Story 1. The station's only tube light suddenly sparked sharply and went out. The distant sound of train wheels and the familiar wind along the fog-covered tracks. All of it vanished in a second, and a deathly silence descended. Right then, from the corner of the room, a strong smell of ancient earth and a rotten leather-like stench hit my nose. I quickly took my phone out of my pocket and turned on the flashlight. As the beam cut through the darkness and fell ahead, my chest thumped hard in fear. The old man dressed as the station master, who had been sitting across the bench all this time, suddenly began to grow taller in a strange jerk. In the darkness, I saw his height increasing until it almost touched the high ceiling of the waiting room. Suddenly, he snapped his neck and looked straight at me. At that very moment, it felt like all the blood in my body had dried up. There were no eyes on his face, no nose, nothing at all. Just a smooth, pitch-black stretch of skin. And his feet were twisted backwards. He stretched out his long, skeletal hand and grabbed my collar in one swift motion. Then, laughing in a horrifying, cracked voice, he said, "You wait for trains at the station of the Jinns in the dead of night. Aren't you afraid?" This incident happened in January 2010. My name is Fahad. At that time, I had gone to a remote northern area for official work. After finishing the job, by the time I reached to catch the train back to the city, it was almost 1:45 at night. The fog was so thick that I couldn't even see a hand's distance in front of me. There were no passengers at the local station. Only a worn-out, broken waiting room stood in one corner. Locals used to say that this station had been abandoned many years ago after a terrible train accident. Since then, strange, unseen entities have been roaming here at deep night. No one comes near the station after 10 p.m., but I didn't believe in such superstitions. So, to escape the cold, I went inside that old waiting room and sat down. Inside, a single dim tube light was flickering. After a while, through the fog, an old man wearing a station master's uniform entered, holding a lantern. Seeing him gave me a little relief. I was about to speak to him. "Uncle, will the train to the city arrive on time, or will it be late again today?" But the old man said nothing. He only gave a faint, strange smile and gestured with his hand for me to sit beside him. Not thinking much, I went and sat on the wooden bench next to him. Within moments of sitting down, I noticed something unsettling. The light from his lantern wasn't casting any shadow at all. The normal sounds of the surrounding air seemed to vanish in an instant. Suddenly, a strong smell of sulfur spread through the air. Right then, the tube light above my head flickered once and went out. Standing in the darkness, I quickly took out my phone and turned on the flashlight. As soon as the beam fell on him, the ground beneath my feet seemed to disappear. Under the light, his body twisted in a strange posture and began stretching upward unnaturally. In a blink, his height became at least 3 times that of a normal human, and his head touched the decaying ceiling of the waiting room. As he slowly turned his neck toward me, I saw that his face had no eyes, no nose, no skin at all, just a pitch-black hollow, like a void of darkness. And from his knees down, both of his legs were completely twisted backward. Fear paralyzed my entire body. My feet felt glued to the cement floor. He extended his long, skeletal arm and in one swift motion grabbed my throat, lifting me at least 2 feet off the ground into the air. As I struggled for oxygen, writhing helplessly, a familiar voice whispered from within that faceless void, "This station was closed long ago, and now you must become a passenger of this darkness." Hearing this, I gathered all the strength of my mind and began reciting Ayatul Kursi silently. Miraculously, the moment I focused on the name of Allah, a powerful invisible force struck him, and he threw me violently onto the ground. In an instant, the entire waiting room dissolved into the air like a burst of black smoke. The next morning, local railway workers found me unconscious in a nearby bush beside the tracks. It took me almost 2 days to regain consciousness. And on my throat, the deep black marks of claw-like fingers from that night were clearly imprinted. They later told me that the station had actually been abandoned about a decade ago, and that old station master had died in a train accident. Although I am fine now, even today, Whenever I hear about a deserted station or a late-night train, my body trembles in fear. It feels as if, from the darkness of those ruins, that tall jinn is still reaching out toward me, whispering, "Next time, I won't let you board any train." This was the incident. Story 2. The incident took place in 1980. It happened to Riyad Ahmed's paternal aunt's husband, whose name was Maulana Abdul Karim. He was the imam and muezzin of an old mosque. The mosque was very old, and because of that, many strange and eerie incidents were said to occur there. Riyad Ahmed had heard several of these stories from him. For example, snakes would suddenly appear from inside the mosque, and sometimes strange insects with unusual shapes would come out. Creatures that were never seen anywhere else. Even the elderly people of the village claimed they had never seen such insects in their lives. Beside the mosque, there was an old pond and an ancient graveyard. On the night of the incident, Maulana Abdul Karim mistakenly left his house without checking the time, thinking it was time for far prayer. As usual, he carried his 5-battery torchlight with him. In those days, such powerful battery torches were commonly used. As he walked toward the mosque and entered its area, he suddenly heard the sound of someone swimming in the pond. He stopped. Who could be swimming at such a late hour? He pointed his torchlight toward the pond. But to his surprise, he saw no one. Not even a ripple disturbed the water. The pond was completely still. It was a warm night, and there was almost no wind. He thought perhaps he had imagined the sound. So he continued walking toward the mosque. But as he got closer, he heard the sound of swimming again. This time he felt uneasy. Once more he shone his torch toward the pond. Yet the scene was the same. No one was there, no movement, and the water remained perfectly calm. A question began to form in his mind. Was it really just his imagination, or something else? At that very moment he witnessed something terrifying. From the old graveyard beside the mosque, a large red ball of fire came rushing toward him. Maulana Abdul Karim did not hesitate for a second. Since he was already close to the mosque, he ran inside as fast as he could. Once inside, he quickly shut the door and turned on the light. As the light filled the room, his eyes fell on the clock hanging on the wall. It showed 3 a.m. He was stunned. He had thought it was time for far, but it was still deep in the night. After calming himself down, he decided that since he was already there, he would spend the remaining time until far offering tahajjud prayers. Thinking this, he stood on one side of the mosque to offer tahajjud prayer. As soon as he raised his hands and said, "Allahu Akbar," he felt as if many people had stood behind him to join the prayer. When he finished the prayer and turned his head to the right and left to say salam, he looked back, but saw no one. He wondered, was this also just his imagination? Anyway, he stood again for prayer. Once again, as he began, he felt the same presence, as if countless people were praying behind him. After finishing, he turned around, but once again, there was no one there. He thought perhaps it was still just his mind playing tricks on him. But the third time he stood for prayer, after a while he began to hear a strange groaning sound coming from outside. After completing his prayer, he walked toward the mosque window. He first looked toward the side where the pond was, but saw nothing. Then he moved to the side facing the graveyard. There, he witnessed a terrifying and strange scene. He saw countless figures standing in the graveyard. They had their hands raised, making supplication. The sound of their collective prayers resembled a low, eerie groaning. He could not understand what language they were speaking or how they were making dua. He could only tell that their voices were not like normal human voices. They were different, unnatural, and incomprehensible. Yet one thing was clear: they were praying. This sight filled him with deep fear. Still, he did not have the courage to open the door and step outside. Instead, he returned to prayer once more. He continued offering tahajjud until the time of far arrived. When far time came, he gave the adhan through the mosque microphone. Slowly, the worshippers began to arrive. But even after they came, he did not share this incident with anyone. He kept it to himself. After that night, he never led prayers in that mosque again. He left his position as imam, and naturally he also stepped down from his role as muezzin. There were many such strange incidents associated with that mosque. And the story does not end here. Riad Ahmed also mentioned another unusual matter. Sometimes the floor of that mosque would become damp, as if sweating. Just like in hot weather when floors in houses, especially on the ground floor, become moist, the same thing would happen in that mosque. And strangely, whenever the floor of the mosque became damp like that, news would soon arrive that someone from the village had died. This had become a common occurrence. Story 3. This incident took place in March 2024. My name is Harian. At that time, I was staying alone in a rest house near an old zamindar house in Kushtia for a sound engineering project. Because of my profession, I often had to work late at night, dealing with different kinds of sound frequencies and audio editing. Those of us who come from a science background usually dismiss so-called supernatural sounds as frequency errors or issues with hearing. But what happened that night shattered that arrogance of mine forever. That night I was mixing a new music track. Everything around me was completely silent. Only a light spring breeze was blowing outside. Suddenly, without any reason, my laptop monitor shut down. But strangely, the audio playing in my headphones didn't stop. Instead, it turned into a harsh, mechanical grinding noise. I quickly took off the headphones and placed them on the table. But the real terror began when I realized that even though the headphones were lying on the table, the sound was still playing inside my ears, just as intensely as before. It felt as if someone was sitting inside my skull, playing some ancient instrument. I tried to leave the room and walked toward the door. But to my shock, every time I moved closer to the door, it seemed to move farther away from me. The distance of the room, its space, felt like it was being stretched like rubber by someone unseen. At that moment, from the darkness in the corner of the room, a shape began to emerge. It had no eyes, no mouth, no nose. In fact, it had no definite body at all. It was just a dense, gray, swirling mass of fog. But from it came a strong smell, like ancient camphor mixed with dried leaves. It didn't speak, but when it stretched its mist-like hand toward me, the sound inside my head transformed, within a second, into the voices of 1,000 souls. I felt like all the good memories of my life, the voices of the people I knew, everything was being sucked into that fog. The walls around me seemed to soften and sink downward. I realized then this entity does not attack physically. It overwhelms a person's hearing and subconscious mind, distorting familiar reality, until a person begins to lose belief in their own existence. From the pain, I felt something liquid trickling out of my ears. With my last strength, I shut my eyes and tried to remind myself who I was. The moment the existence of Allah's holy name came to my mind, that demonic sound inside me stopped with a sharp, cracking noise. At the same time, the entire fog-like entity vanished into the air like a burst of hot wind. Even then, I continued reciting Surah Ikhlas, Surah Nas, and Surah Falaq. While reciting these, I lost consciousness and collapsed there. The next afternoon, the caretaker of the rest house found me unconscious on the floor and admitted me to a nearby hospital. When I regained consciousness, I learned that there had indeed been slight bleeding from my ears. The doctors said that my eardrum had been damaged by exposure to an intense sound frequency. But they still could not explain where that frequency came from, especially when the laptop had been completely shut down. Although I am physically fine now, even today, whenever I hear a faint tune at night, like the whistling of the wind, my heartbeat freezes. It feels like that formless, unseen jinn is still whispering near my ear. Your hearing isn't finished yet. So, brothers, this was today's story. I hope you liked it. If you did, please like, comment, and share.